excuse me. I'm going to pass you out an updated study guide, and it is up on Schoology as well. Oops, I'm giving you all of them. It's not more, it's just clarified. It's just clarified. That's all. I had told you that there was some pieces that I didn't feel was very, what's the word I want? Thorough? That's a good way of saying it. Thank you. Because I had done some copying and pasting from WAU's study guide, and there just wasn't a whole lot of detail there. Even as I was looking at it, I'm saying, what in the world does this mean? So I wanted to give you more detail there, okay? So that's what the yellow piece is. Let me pull it up here for you so you can see it. So I've given you the detail for this somatic and autonomic nervous systems, and we'll talk a bit about this. But those are the pieces I want you to be comfortable with for those guys. That somatic is actually controlling the voluntary muscles. It's conscious thought. That if I say, Nels, bend your elbow, he can bend his elbow, right? But if I were to say, Nels, digest your food, he can't necessarily control that. I mean, I should say stop digesting his food, because I'm sure he's already doing that without me asking. Okay? The autonomic is what's controlling those involuntary pieces. So the digestion of the food, the heartbeat, the function of the glands that are producing the hormones streaming through your body, right? This is controlled by that autonomic nervous system. And that functions completely independently, no conscious thought. Sophia never has to say, is my heart going to stop beating? I better keep it going. No, it's just going to do it, right? Sir? Is there a difference between what parts of the body control that, like the brain? There are different places in the brain that does that, absolutely. And we'll talk a bit about that. We're giving you the very, very brief pieces, yeah. It almost pains me, but we are, yeah. So that is that sense there. The second bullet point on the autonomic nervous system, we're diving a little bit further into that. This is the very end of the chapter, in chapter 9. That you can divide this autonomic nervous system into two pieces, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Has anybody ever heard of the sympathetic nervous system before? It's a fairly common thing. In 3 words, you could tell me what the sympathetic nervous system does. Fight or flight. Okay? It controls the responses when we get scared or when something is happening that kicks us into gear. Right? If we're just going along and suddenly, bam! Ooh, I got you. Good. That was good, right? Sorry. You feel that, right? Your heart skips. You're like, wait, what? I'm sorry for those of you listening online. I was very loud. Right. It releases that adrenaline. Your heart skips. You start beating faster. You get warm. Whew, right? I'm sorry. I'm not trying to bother you. But that's what you feel, right? That, I got to fight, right? Or I got to run. That's it. Okay? Now, are you comfortable? And I'll get your question 1 second. Are you comfortable that happens rapidly, right? Boom, that's quick. But now it's going to take you a minute or two before you calm down, right? That's the parasympathetic that's starting to work now. The parasympathetic says, hey, no, that was Mr. Hess being crazy. Nothing's coming through to kill you. Relax. But your heart is still going a little bit, right? I mean, you're still a little, are you with me? I'm sorry, Hector, it's the best way I know to illustrate that stuff. Sympathetic, parasympathetic, right? Your question. Exactly. Blood pumping to muscles, to your brain to think. Right, exactly. Yep. Are you with me, friends? It does. Yep. It'll release that big hit of adrenaline real fast to get you going. And the parasympathetic's like, no, cool, no, relax. Back to homeostasis. I'm sorry? Sure. Yeah. That's a little bit more of a cognitive response But the same type of symptoms you're talking about, yes. Yeah, certainly. And again, I just wish we had 1,000 more minutes so we could talk about this stuff. That is not necessarily the sympathetic nervous system kicking in, but it presents itself very similarly. So these feelings of anxiety can still produce the same effects, but it's not that your nervous system necessarily kicking that in to start it. Does that make sense? Same result-ish, but different beginning point. Well, in some ways, sure. But often that's just kind of this feedback we get, this loop we get into. If you've ever had any sort of anxiety, it's just kind of, you can't reason with it. It just, you kind of get that spiralness that just keeps going. There are ways to break out of that, but it's a difficult piece. And it's not necessarily that it can be a chemical or a biological piece, but often it's just these pathways that we've gotten going in the brain that's doing that. It would be the same kind of thing. Yeah, that would just be a little more intense. It's just the anxiety piece, yeah, that has gotten so that now you are like literally fighting or flying.
How do you get that?
There are lots of different ways. I mean, it can be that there is something actually wrong with the system itself. It can be just, again, that these loops that we've gotten ourselves into, it's very difficult to get out of that sometimes. Yeah. Are you with me, friends? The only other piece that I did put on here, and this is, well, I subtracted and then I added. Down here where it says it used to say list the 4, there really are only 3 that are talked about in your textbook, so I changed that for you. So it is the brachial, it is the cervical, and it is a lumbar sacral. Yes? Cool. So I did add this piece here, and this is because, again, as I looked back through what WAU did, on their study guide they didn't have functions, but on the test they did. I don't know why. No, just for these 7. All 12, you have to know the name and the number, and whether it's motor or sensory, or both. And then these we will talk about these today. These are the actual ones, and I'll tell you honestly, the names help you understand what they do. If you get the names, the functions are pretty straightforward, okay? But these are like the main ones. I don't know if I say the main ones, but the ones that have the easiest, simplest, most common used of these cranial nerves. All right. So again, I passed that out to you. It is up on Schoology. It's the very first thing on the very top. It says updated study guide. You have it exactly like that up there. So again, I apologize for that, but I wanted to clarify that with you. Second piece. If you are not opposed, and if you are, let's talk. I would like to move this test to Friday instead of Thursday. Now, I don't know what that does. I looked in this calendar. There's nothing there. I see a couple of, Oh, no, Andrew's like, no, yeah, no, please, yes. Okay, come talk with me, okay? If Thursday would really work better for you, as I'm seeing mostly yeses, come talk with me and we can discuss about that piece. And if you want to take it separately, we could talk about that. No, Friday is when my plan is. I already changed it even on RunWeb for you. But if Thursday is what you'd really prefer, come talk with me. Okay, so let's hit these cranial nerves quick, and then we'll jump into the brain. All right, so you had lots of mnemonics. I was just reading, I think your textbook even had a different mnemonic that was listed for the cranial nerves. Well, let's start with olfactory. It's number 1. And what job does the olfactory nerve do? Sensory for smell. In other words, it allows you to smell. Now, do you have to move anything to smell? Well, okay, but I can smell even if my nose doesn't move. Like I can wrinkle it and stuff. So in other words, there's no motor for smell, right? Like it's just air coming up, and we're learning all about this next chapter. Next chapter is simply the 5 senses and how they work. We're just bringing air up into the nose where it's reacting. So the olfactory nerve is what does that smell. It allows you to smell. And it is a pure sensory nerve. Optic nerve, number 2. Optic, what does that make you think of? Eyes, right? So this is the sensory for vision. This is the nerve that actually attaches on the back of your eyeball that sends a signal to your brain as light comes in. We'll learn much more about that in the next unit here. Oculomotor. Again, ocu, we're talking about what? Eyes, right? And then motor is motor, like actually doing, right? So the oculomotor nerve is motor for vision. So number 2, optic is sensory. Number 3, oculomotor is the motor for vision. So that's controlling the little muscles that move your eyes around and allow you to see and focus and those kind of pieces. We skip down to number 7, which is facial. Again, not that 4, 5, and 6 aren't important, but I had to draw the line somewhere unless I made you learn all of them, and there's just too much information. Number 7 is the facial nerve. So can you see that it has both sensory and motor? So it's a mixed nerve, right? It does both for our sensory and motor piece. It's sensory for the tongue, so it helps you with what sense? Taste, right? And then it's also motor for the face. Now there are lots of nerves that control your facial movements, but we're giving the facial nerve some credit for that. That's one of the pieces it does. That it helps you with that lovely smile or with that sad frown. Number 8 is the vestibulocochlear nerve. And again, be careful with your mnemonics, because auditory is what they used to call this nerve. Again, that's how I learned it when I was in school. But we changed it to vestibulocochlear. Does anybody know why? It has a huge impact in balance. Your ear, again, we'll learn about this in the next unit. Your ear, very close to the organs, the places that do the hearing, control your balance. And they both run on the same nerve, this vestibulocochlear nerve. So we were shortchanging it if we just called it auditory, because it doesn't just hear, it also helps you with your balance piece. So that's why they call it the vestibulocochlear. The cochlea is the part of your ear that allows you to hear. The vestibular system is balance. So that's where that comes from. Number 10, the vagus. Does anybody know what vagus means? It's a Latin word. This is an old nerve. Has anybody ever heard of a vagabond? What's that? The bad guy, a wanderer. Just walk around, right? No, not rooted to one place. The vagus nerve is so crazy. Do you see that it goes... Well, let's look at a picture. Thank you. You always have this right ready for me. I appreciate that. Oh, I don't even have it. That's funny. Well, I was going to show you the picture, but it's not there. The vagus nerve is a cranial nerve, right? It comes from the brain directly, and yet goes all the way to your intestines. From here. It's like not a very direct route, but it's true. I've only had you to know that it's autonomic for the heart. It's what helps control the heart. When it speeds up, when it slows down. There are a lot of things that control the heart. We'll learn more about that. But that's the main piece I want you to be comfortable with for the vagus nerve. That it, again, wanders all the way from the brain all the way down to the heart and to the intestines. It helps control your digestion as well. So it's a very autonomic, right? The things you're not voluntarily controlling. And last but not least, hypoglossal. Does anybody know what the glossus is? The tongue. That's the actual real name for the tongue, is the glossus. So hypoglossal is the nerve that gives the motor for your tongue, to allow you to thick it out or make a little shamrock-looking thing. Do that? You whiff it up? Anyway. That's the hypoglossal nerve. And that's number 12. Are you with me, my friends? It's good stuff. Okay, let's dive into the brain then. You've got to go back a little ways in your textbook because we moved forward past that. Oh, perfect. Page number 249 is where this diagram is. And this is what you're going to get a chance to look at. It'll be on Thursday when we do some dissecting. It may be tomorrow, but probably going to be Thursday. Where you're going to have a brain very similar to this. We're not going to use human brains. We're using sheep brains. They're a little smaller, a little easier to deal with. because I can't like actually order human brains to dissect, unfortunately. Unless someone's willing to volunteer. No? Good. All right. So let's start with big picture. When you think of the brain, you think of that big gray spot, right? The big gray area on the top. What do we call that part? The cerebrum. Cerebrum. And that is, these are the neurons, right? These are the actual neurons that are making connections between places. Each of the brain, it kind of looks like it's like a bunch of worms together. Does that make sense? That there are these raised portions and these lower portions, like these hills and valleys, right? So the hills are called gyruses, or gyrus, or gyri, I think is the plural. And the valleys are called sulcuses, or sulci. Does anybody know why your brain has this? That's not a bad thought. The meninges are more the protective piece. Sir? I can fit more surface area, right? If I've got things that are moving up and down in the same area, I have a lot of surface area, right? If you looked at our brains versus the sheep brain I'm going to show you when we're dissecting, versus, let's say, a rat's brain, they have much less sulci and gyri than we do. Our brain is very convoluted in lots of bumps and hollows, whereas the sheep's is not as much, and certainly the rat is much less. Does that make sense? So it's allowing for connections to be made. More of these connections, more surface areas. Good, well done. Beneath that, so are you all comfortable on this picture? I always chuckle when I have you guys label this picture. This thing right here is not a gyrus, and nothing else is. Are you comfortable? All of these light pieces are a gyrus, and all of the dark areas are the sulcus. Does that make sense? A gyrus is the hill, the sulci is the valley. Does that make sense? They do. Yeah, slightly different. Yeah. Beneath that, we have this layer of white tissue that's there. And that's called the corpus callosum. Does anybody know what that's for? And then I get your question, Josh. It's the connection between the two hemispheres. You've heard this whole left brain, right brain thing. Even my wife was talking about this in class a little bit. Yeah, it's not the most scientific thing. There is some validity to it. And again, we talked about this. It's all right. It's all right. And again, the point is that there is some generalizations you can do, but it is a very much a both. And this corpus callosum is the connection between them. In this picture, it just shows up as just this little line because this is a transverse section, right? We just cut the brain and we're looking at it from the side. Okay, your question, Joshua. Yeah, I've been asked that question before, and I've done some research on it. That number is like 150 years old, and where it came from, they're not really sure. You certainly use a vast portion of your brain. Can you do more? Like, is the brain limited? No, it really isn't. We can do so much more than we give it credit for. So do we spend our time using our brain as well as we could? No. We spend an awful lot of time on this, which is the antithesis of using our brain well. And I'm talking to me too, I'm not pointing fingers. Okay? I read somewhere that if you were to go back 150 or 1,000 years and you say, hey, look, I've got the entire knowledge of the world right here, and yet I look at cat pictures. It's fun. That's what I spend my time. Anyway, or I spend my time reading ESPN. Wait, what? Is that really what the best use? Anyway. Okay, let's keep going. I'm moving down. I get into the diencephalon. Now, I'm going to pass this out to you. And don't freak out, because you do not have to know these. If this was last year, you would, because one of the pieces of this brain chapter or brain unit that I've cut out is an awful lot about the brain stem and how that works. So I'm passing this out to you so you can see. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things here, and these are the functions of those different things. I will put this up, or it is already up on Schoology for you. It's a Google Doc. But again, you don't have to know these pieces. Okay? What's on the study guide is what you need to be comfortable with. But that diencephalon is right in between there, just above the midbrain, right? And it's mostly gray matter, is what it is. Remember that we have white matter and gray matter? The white is the myelinated axons, right? And the gray are the unmyelinated. So that's what's happening in the diencephalon. There's lots of other pieces that are given to you there about the diencephalon, that it's the thalamus, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland. So it encompasses all of this area. No, it is actually, it looks like a cavity, but no, it is actually a something. There is, right, that's what these ventricles are. There's another picture we'll get to that show those guys. Sorry. It does, yes, yes, yes. It is kind of the relay hub. That's what the thalamus is, that everything goes through there. I liken it to, well, to our Mrs. Maddox. That anything in the school kind of goes through her and then gets filtered upward, and then as they do stuff, it comes back through her and back down. Your question, madam?
So the diencephalon is a sensory?
It's what?
Sensory hub?
It is, yeah. They talk much more about it here in this page. So again, the pieces of thalamus, hypothalamus, those are the things that the diencephalon is made up of. And it does those pieces. So you can see on that list that diencephalon has a huge number of functions, right? It is this central relay hub for the sensory impulses. And that hypothalamus is what regulates a ton of stuff, like when you're hungry, when you're awake, the amount of water you have, how much you're growing. It's a big part. And it just kind of looks like a blob on the screen, right? But that's a key part of what's going on in your brain. Let's keep moving down. The midbrain. Now we've actually gotten into the brain stem itself. So diencephalon is a little bit higher than the brain stem, kind of that in-between area. And then we get into the brain stem itself, and that's divided into three pieces: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. Again, on the back of that sheet are the functions for those pieces. That the midbrains, that would be the very top part there, that contains the myelinated axons that join the lower parts of the systems. So it's kind of the bridge, right, between the top parts and the bottom parts, between your spinal cord and the brain. It also has some centers for certain visual reflexes, how your eyes, your pupils dilate and not. That's controlled there in that midbrain portion. The pons, just below that, kind of that large bulging area, the pons. Again, this is for relaying those sensory impulses up to the medulla and then to the cerebrum. And it also sends motor signals. So again, we're kind of in that crossroads, right, between going up and coming down. And then last but not least, we have the medulla oblongata on the bottom there. The signals have to go through there as it's going through. It also helps control your heart, your breathing, the vasomotor center, so the controlling of your blood vessels, how they are, whether they're dilated or whether they're contracted. That's controlled there on the midbrain. Have you heard of the brain stem being called the animal brain? Have you ever heard this kind of term before? That the thought behind this is the creatures that have much less intelligence than we have, this top part is much less developed. But we all kind of have the similar parts down here. Again, it doesn't mean that we all came from the same ancestor. It just means that everything that's alive has to be able to breathe and control its heartbeat and control its digestion, right? So even if you're not thinking about calculus, you still have to be able to do those things. Does that make sense? And again, the more intelligent you are, the more this top part is developed. We've got this little piece stuck on the back here called the cerebellum, which in Latin, and I kid you not, just means little brain. It's the little brain on the back. Does anybody know what that cerebellum does? Yes. Receive sensory information and coordination. This is your balance. This is your, I'm taking and I'm smoothing your muscles out so that the motions are nice and smooth and not jerky. If you've seen folks who have brain injuries, many times their movement is not very coordinated. They try and reach out to grab something and their hand is kind of moving and they can't get it to go from here to there, right? That can often be a problem in that cerebellum area. It's not able to smooth the motion out and make it where you want it to go. The last piece is this moving down into the spinal cord itself. And notice the brainstem basically just becomes the spinal cord. There's not like this little spot where, oh, here it is, this is brainstem, this is spinal cord. Nah, it's just kind of where it comes out of the skull, here in the foramen magnum. Remember the big hole in your head at the bottom? That's, once it gets below that, we call it the spinal cord. I will point out, this is not on the diagram, but can you see this guy right there? Not sure why it didn't give me a full. That little guy right there? Does anybody know what that is? Any ideas? It's a gland. It's the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland, we're going to learn more about this in the next semester. Does anyone know what the pituitary gland's main function is? Hormones. It's actually what we call the master gland. It controls a lot of the other glands in the endocrine system. Kind of. Yeah, that's a good way to think of it. But they don't label that in that picture, but it just begs to be told you about because it's right there for you. Okay? Any questions here? So please understand, as far as the diagram goes, I do want you to be comfortable with this diagram. The functions are going to be what I'm going to show you next. Okay? So again, you don't have to know the functions of all these pieces. I've provided them for you here because I think you're curious and you would want to know. But you don't have to memorize all of this. We cool? All right, then the last piece for today is we go down to the functions of the brain. And beautiful, thank you. Page 251. Just as far as what's here on this page.
Not like the gyrus does this.
No. No. Okay. So we're looking at the lobes of the brain, the different actual divisions, if you will. And we can kind of divide the brain into a couple of main pieces. We have the frontal lobe. We have the parietal lobe. So frontal's in the front, parietals in the top, back, sides and back. We have the occipital lobe, which is the very bottom back. We have the temporal lobe, which is on the side. And then, of course, we've got cerebellum and brainstem. Those are kind of the four main pieces. There is another lobe that your book talks about, the insula, which is kind of deep inside there. We don't know tons about what that does. There's a little blurb in your textbook that talks about that insula, but it's not shown in any diagrams, so we kind of ignore it a bit. They think it's a lot of the deep connections between places, like when you bite into a pizza and it makes you all happy and you're, this is such a great experience. It's kind of this insula piece. Okay? Or you see a cat cough up a hairball and you're like, ew, that's so gross. Those kind of experiences, feelings, that would be what they think that comes from.
Does the frontal lobe include the red part?
It does, exactly. Yes, so the actual line between the two lobes goes between that red and the yellow piece. But they colored the red and yellow differently because they're important. Shh, stay with me, guys. What does the red part do? This is our motor. This is our voluntary responses. So it allows you to move your arm, to move your legs, to move your hands, to move your face, is controlled in that part of the brain, just anterior to the central sulcus, which is the line between the frontal and the parietal. Just posterior to that, what happens there? That's the sensory area. And that sensory area is what gives you the ability to feel that when I touch the table, my brain knows, oh yeah, I can feel that from the hand. It's a little bit cool, it's hard, right? Those are our sensory areas. In the rest of the frontal lobe, we call that the executive functions. So things like planning and concentration and problem solving, those would be in the frontal lobe. You as teenagers, your frontal lobe is still significantly developing. And I say that, I'm not accusatorily, that's truly the case. You don't have full control over this part of your brain. How does that manifest itself? As teenagers, we make goofy decisions. We don't necessarily see all the consequences of our actions, like not paying attention in class, right? We just don't see them. As you get older, that part of your brain gets better. It gets better able to see those kind of things, and you don't make as many goofy mistakes. Do we still make foolish mistakes as adults? Of course we do, okay? But we're not usually as as goofy, I guess I'll just use that word, as a teenager brain. Yes, ma'am.
So what part of the yellow and red part of the
I'm sorry?
which lobe are they in? The yellow and red?
The red is in the frontal, the yellow is in parietal. That central sulcus goes right in the middle between them. That divides. In the frontal lobe, you've got this little island there that's called the motor speech area. That's Broca's area. So that's what actually allows my lips and my tongue to move in a specific way to form the words that I want to say right now. And that is, again, part in the frontal lobe. Kind of right in between the parietal and temporal, there's the Wernicke's area, which is the sensory speech area. So that's allowing me to hear and interpret that speech. Does that make sense? Sometimes when you have a stroke, one of these two areas are affected, and it's quite interesting. In one case, if that Broca's is affected, the person knows the word they want to say, they can write the word they want to say, but they can't actually say it. Like the mouth just won't work to do it. If the Wernicke's area is affected, you can hear things, you can speak clearly, but you can't necessarily get the meaning of what's being said. Does that make sense? That language piece gets messed up, and that's just super frustrating. My dad has the beginning of Alzheimer's, and this is where he struggles the most. He wants to say something, he knows it, like he loves baseball. He wants to talk to me about baseball. And he's trying to come up with the word and just can't spit it out because that's a part that's affected for him. And so you're guessing, are you talking about this person or that person? Until finally, yes, okay, yes. That's where you're going. Does that make sense? The temporal lobe, its big thing is auditory, which makes sense, right? Because your ears are right next to that. So that's going to be a big area for there. It's also how you interpret those sensory experiences, or where you, well, this says the memory of visual and auditory patterns. Memory is a very vague thing. It's kind of all over the place. But they're talking about these visual and auditory patterns. That's where you, so that I can, yeah, if you don't mind, so that I can hold this up and you can say that this is a water bottle. You see this, you recognize, oh, this is kind of a cool water bottle actually. But you recognize that shape rather than saying, oh no, it's a pencil or it's a watermelon. Does that make sense? And back in the back, and I'll get you, Josh, back in the back you have the occipital lobe, which is dealing with vision. It's very strange that your eyes are way up here, but your vision is way back here. The part that controls it is in the very back. And yes, there is a nerve that runs all the way, that optic nerve runs from your eyes all the way back to the very back of your head. And that's where it actually even crosses over. So your left eye is interpreted on the right side of your brain, and the right eye is interpreted on the left side of your brain. Yes, ma'am? It is. Yeah. Just from the concavity of the inside of your eye. That's what. Like if you look at a spoon, look at it, everything's upside down. Same thing. Same thing. And yep, if you wear you can wear glasses that will actually flip everything upside down. If you wear those long enough, your brain will flip it right side up again. I'm not kidding you. Your brain is an incredible thing. Yeah, and then you take the glasses off and now everything's upside down. And it'll eventually flip it back around. You'll be upside down for a little while, but yeah, it will. It's craziness. All right. That's all I need from you today. I will see you on the morrow. Adios. Hello, it's Nathan.